Hi everyone, thanks a lot for joining us for this ninth Urban AI conversation. My name is Hubert and I'm the founder of Urban AI. So what is Urban AI? Urban AI is a think tank that federates a global community of pioneers in the emerging field of urban artificial intelligence. And together we propose ethical modes of governance and sustainable uses of urban artificial intelligence. We are also investigating the concept of urbanized technology. And Urban AI is a space for debate and exchange, and this is why we organize regularly this Urban AI conversation, during which contributors and members of the community can present you the latest research, idea, or contributions. And today we have the great pleasure to have with us Naysan, Adrienne, and François. So it will be very special Urban AI conversation today because we will have a kind of a roundtable moderated by Naysan. So Naysan, you are the CEO of Can Forecast. Hi, Naysan.
Hi everyone.
François, you are currently Head of Innovation and Strategy at Innovatech, and you were the former mayor of, it was, Rosemont-la-Petite-Rairie. And Adrienne Schmoeker, you are currently an independent consultant in data, urban innovation, and public participation, and you were the former director of civic engagement and strategy and former deputy chief analytics officer at the city of New York. So we will have like 25 minutes of conversation between Naysan, Adrienne, and François. And following this conversation, we will have a Q&A session. So as usual, if you have questions in mind, feel free to use the chat or to wait for the Q&A session. Naysan, Adrienne, and François, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for this. I'm really looking forward to this very interesting conversation. So I don't know if maybe Adrienne and François, you want to say a few sentences about yourselves before we start, before I jump into the questions.
Adrienne, you want to start? If you want.
Sure. Happy to. Yeah, and thank you, Hubert, for the introduction, for setting this up, and Naysan for being our facilitator today. Also a pleasure to meet folks who've taken the time to join in. Looking forward to the conversation. So in terms of some kind of additional context and background, Hubert mentioned that I worked for the city of New York. I was there for about 5.5 years. I worked for the CTO's office, also at the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics. I managed New York City's open data program for a few years, helped double the amount of data available to the public, and really helped build out the internal governance program for meeting legal compliance requirements, but also helping to encourage, incentivize, and kind of change the data culture around open data internally within city government, and also built out a variety of civic engagement initiatives trying to make New York City open data accessible to a broader public under the mandate of open data for all. From there, I moved on, as Hubert mentioned, to becoming the Deputy Chief Analytics Officer, so overseeing a team of 10 data scientists, their portfolios, their analytics projects, building out a data operations capacity, data policy capacity, and continuing to support open data within New York City government. Since then, I've struck out on my own, and I'm now supporting a variety of different projects, working with cities in data, helping to launch their data innovations through the GovLab at NYU. Also supporting students in urban data science as an adjunct at NYU CUSP, which is the Center for Urban Science and Progress, and supporting an innovative startup based out of Toronto, stewarding the open source standard DTPR, Digital Trust for Places and Routines, bringing transparency and visibility to technology in public spaces. So that's my longer extended bio of what I'm up to. Very passionate about data governance. I think it's one of those unfortunately somewhat unsexy topics that actually makes a very big difference in how data work and data innovation gets done. So excited for the conversation.
Great. For myself, instead of the borough mayor, I was the deputy mayor responsible at the smart city, IT, innovation, higher education at the City of Montreal for 4 years, and I especially work on the strategy of open data and the numeric transformation of the city. We have a huge work to do at that time, and we work a lot with other cities like New York and Lyon and Nantes and other cities in the world to get the best practices. And today, I just continue my work with that, and I'm working in a consultant office, and I'm work with city to help them to use data and innovation to do their ecological transition in the context of the ecological crisis. So I'm continuing my work to help city, but in most higher scale than I was before. We're going to talk today about the case of Montreal and what I've done. So it's going to be a pleasure for me.
Thank you so much to both of you. With the expertise you have, I think it's the perfect team for this conversation. So I'm going to start maybe with François William. So as you mentioned, you worked as mayor of the borough of Rosemont between 2019 and 2009 and 2021. And you are also deputy mayor of the city of Montreal in charge of innovation, smart city for 4 years. So could you tell us a little bit more about the data governance at the City of Montreal? So some of your priorities when you were at this position that you were trying to move forward.
Yes, thank you for that question. When I was named at the charge of the smart city and IT in the City of Montreal, we have a huge problem because we have no data governance policy or anything about that. We have a politics of open data, but we don't have in the organization governance for the data and all the usage of all technology like IoT or AI or something while gotta use the data. So the first thing I said and what we just indicate for the goal that we have to focus on, it's to get an infrastructure of the databases to be sure that we're going in the right direction. Because if you're just going to take some on a new tech or on a new apps to get at the top of the what is doing and what is going to be done in the future, it's not the right direction, I think, and that's why we begin to start with the smart infrastructure of databases and data strategy with a new kind of governance in all the city. Because what you have to know, it's Montreal is a decentralized city. You have 19 boroughs and the central services of the city, and all the boroughs have a lot of power to do anything. So you have all the services of the city and all the boroughs who use the data, and if you don't have any data governance, you can go anywhere or everywhere, and it's very difficult to control that. And it's quite worried for the citizen who know that you use the data of the citizen who's moving in the city or make transaction with the city. So we have to get that new governance. And what we've done at that time, we just make a trip in a lot of cities to get the best practices. For example, New York, Lyon, Nantes, Buenos Aires, and Barcelona. So we get influence about all that thing, and especially the Declaration of Cities for Digital Rights will inspire us of what is the ethic and higher responsible way to put that governance. So that was at the first the plan that we focus on, and then we just put a right governance of the data in the City of Montreal, and then now we will be sure that all thing was used and we have the same direction in every services in every boroughs.
Well, thank you so much. Adrienne, so François mentioned that you finally were one of the inspirations, the program that you launched. So just to recap, you joined the New York City Mayor's Office of Data Analytics in 2017. And in just 2 years, you successfully grew the largest municipal open data program in the United States. So do you see some similarities or differences between what François William said and New York data governance?
Sure. First of all, it's extremely flattering to hear that New York City and what we were doing with open data at the time and now is inspiring to others. That means a lot. We ourselves, did our best to take a look at what was happening internationally. We're also very inspired by the work of Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, and the many other pioneers that have, led to the broader open data movement across the world. I would say in terms of how we thought about New York City open data, and I'll also, take a moment to say it was definitely a team effort, not just Adrienne Schmoeker behind the scenes, taking data, putting it online. Lots of great folks within New York City's IT agency, and then a governance structure. So we had designated open data coordinators within every mayor's office, every city agency, that acted as our points of contact. And we also had an extremely powerful tool at our disposal, which was a law. The New York City Open Data Law was passed in 2012 by a series of passionate advocates in New York City and members of the city council at the time in collaboration with the Bloomberg administration. And I will say that there's nothing like a law to help get open data published. And one of the things that really helped support the volume of data that we saw kind of pass on to the portal while I was helping to coordinate the program was that there was a deadline written into the law that, all open data must be published by this date. And so, a legal deadline is a very powerful thing. And one thing that I think about a lot when it comes to data and data governance in particular is incentives and people. I attribute this to the fact that I studied public policy and economics incentives, public policy people. And so thinking about, what are the sticks and carrots at your disposal? And a law is a very big stick. And I did my best to try to cultivate a few carrots. So, that came in a variety of different forms, bringing these open data coordinators together for the first time, asking them what their challenges were, helping to meet those challenges, providing trainings. We actually recognized open data coordinators who were doing a great job through a public awards process. I made sure that I was contacting their leadership to celebrate them and really put them on a pedestal whenever possible. Public servants don't often get recognition for work, especially if it's a percentage of their job. I think we had one open data coordinator for whom that was their full-time job. Everyone else, it was a subset of their job description, and rarely work that they were, really celebrated or thanked for internally. They were the people knocking on doors saying, when are you getting me the data set? I have to get up on the website. Come on, help me out. And so maybe not always the favorite people within their city agency. So yes, I would say that silos are real within government. I think what François described in terms of Montréal being decentralized, New York City government, I wouldn't describe as decentralized as what François said, but we are a large organization where it's a city government, but has more than 300,000 employees, depending on how you count, 100 or so different city agencies and mayor's offices and commissions, all who were required to publish data under the open data law, and serving close to 9 million people who call New York City home. So in a lot of ways, New York City government, while a local municipal government, is the size of some federal level governments in different parts of the world. And so having to figure out how to coordinate across such a large organization is definitely a challenge, whether government or not. I started my career in a Fortune 500 company that was also huge and old and siloed. And so there is something to be said that once you reach a certain scale, coordination just becomes difficult. And that's where having a data governance process in place becomes essential. I feel like I jumped around a lot and may not have quite answered your question, but hopefully that provides a bit of insight into what we were up to in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. And you actually touched on my next question that I had. So, in the article we wrote together, which I interviewed you, you said that it's important not to neglect the political dimension of data governance. Were you referring to specifically the law that was passed, or there are other aspects as well of political uh, aspects that needs to be dealt with?
Yes, and I think we were talking about this a little bit right before the session started as well. And François was providing some telling examples that he's dealt with recently. But I think that there's this perception that data and technology are politically agnostic, like, oh, they are just tools. There's nothing political about them. But the reality is that that's not true. We see that more and more, I think, as data policy is entering the kind of broader social context and dialogue, what we're seeing with tech companies, and really understanding that these are not neutral programs, policies, tools, and operations, but there can be political components to them. So I think that within a data governance context, there's a few different ways of thinking about this. Yes, if you have open data laws, you definitely have to coordinate around, if the city council is holding a hearing, how are you going to report on what you're doing? That's a whole category of what I would call kind of political nuance in how you talk about your work. But then otherwise, even within the organization, there's the question of power dynamics. Who's managing the governance structure? Who do they report to? For example, if you think about corporate social responsibility and you think about where it sits within an organization, is it within the legal department? Is it within the marketing department? Is it within the CEO's office? That org chart data point tells you a lot about how that organization is thinking about corporate social responsibility. And you can take the same lens to data governance within an organization. Is this data system being governed by the IT agency? Is it being governed by the public works agency? Is it being governed by the mayor's office? What is the reason for that? And you can tell a lot, and there's usually some political underpinnings around those decisions. And then I would say that there's also always within government the current climate to keep in mind. So even if, let's say, a police department data set is kind of next on the list for release, if there are some sensitive headlines in the news, you might either have to expedite the release of that data set or put it on hold for a few weeks, depending on what your press office thinks. And that's the reality of the work as well. And one might say, well, it should be published no matter what, it's ready, it's public information, but that's not always the reality of, how these processes work. And we have to remember that data is information. And so there is kind of this communications lens to that as well.
This is such a great point. François, William, I could see you were nodding at some of Adrienne's comments. How would you describe the political aspect of data governance?
I was a political, so I can talk a lot about that. And I'm going to use an example that is real. There's a commission in Quebec province who some mayors are around the table and discuss about smart city. And one of these discussions we have with the president of that commission said that Montreal is going too far with data openness. They said that it's not a good example for the other city because when you open too much data too fast, it's a danger for the politician because the journalism can use it against political. And so you can see the spirits of some politician about open data. And I fought a lot and so much against that kind of culture because it's a question of transparency and democracy. For me, it's the minimum we can just use and offer to the citizen to be sure that all the democracy and all the services in the city use the right data to give right services for citizens. And I think it's important for politicians when they make some decision to use data. And after that, if you have that data open for everybody, you can't be opposed about what kind of decision you made, because it came from the right data, the fact. So for me, it's important for democracy to be sure that most data are public and all the journalists, the citizen, the organism can use it. And another part, you have to be sure that politicians don't get hands on the strategy of open data. For me, it's very important, because when you politicize that, it can just be dangerous. So in Montreal, what we've done, we just adopt a resolution for unanimous resolution in the city council to be sure that we've got the right strategy for everyone. So no politician right now in Montreal just been opposed and were opposed by that strategy. And so that's the administration who managed that, and we have a policy of open data by default so that every data was open during the cycle of when you can open it. Sometimes it's difficult because you have some services who cannot do the job, so you need help from the IT services. And the thing is, the strategy that we put in when we open a new set of data, we just brief the politic what is the risk of that new set of data, and what is going to be the response for journalists and citizens about some point you can have. Because of course, sometimes when you open a new set, you're going to be more transparent, and sometimes you're not really happy about the fact that you can start in that new set of data. And so, for example, the sewer pipes, the statistic about the sewer pipes, and so you know exactly how these infrastructure is in the city. And of course, probably you're not very happy that citizens know exactly what is the situation of the sewer pipe. So you have to manage that. So it's important to be sure that we're mostly transparent. But another way, when you have to plan, for example, a new kind of mobility in the city, if you don't have that data, how can you get the best decision to be sure that when you implement a new bike path or a new buses line or everything, you just do it by only ideology, so politics, or you do it by data. So when you get data, when you have that things, you can justify that new politics. So what I'm saying to politics is use more data to be sure that your job is easier. It's not going to be the other part. And for example, we have in Montreal a coalition with Boston and Lyon for the usage of responsible analytics data for the mobility, and we just presented to all politics. And it's take around 2 years to be sure that that coalition is working. And the resistance came from the politics, of course, not by my part, because I want to go faster than the other one. But now that coalition existing, and it can take more data from other cities and get more great decision. But after that, I'm agreeing. You have to get a leadership from politics to be sure that things going fast. If you don't have that leadership, some cities not going in that way. And I saw so many cities who cannot do that, or the politics don't understand the benefit of the usage of the data. So that's why now I have another project to help city with France to create an observatory of data for municipality in Quebec, to help them to get great decision and use and put a new culture of data in municipality. It's important to get that data-driven decision-making culture in city too, not only in private organization. So to be more competitive, to be greater in the services of the citizen, we have to use more data, and politics have to get that strategy as an opportunity to be better.
That's a fantastic comment. I just read in the chat. So George has a comment that I wanted to ask you about. So he said, I think the problem is not open data, but trusted data. This is the real problem. And what would be your point of view, and how would you go about building trust? Oh, I'm gonna read. Sorry, François. He just wrote something. So I just want to read it for everybody before I, I let you go. So he said, I was part of a few meetings with CSPRI discussion, blockchain capabilities for disaster risk reduction management. Okay, so this is for blockchain. One of the important things is the use of blockchain to assure data is not compromised. Okay, this seems like a pretty advanced technology. So I'm just gonna go back to the trust issue, and just if you want to talk about blockchain, it's completely up to you.
I'm going to give you an example from a friend of mine who, when I was named head at the smart city and IT in the city of Montreal, just asked me because I was named, I was a specialist in programming and technology, but I was mostly a manager. So he asked me about an apps of weather maps. He was logging in the app weather maps and said to me that it's curious because he's playing golf. I'm not playing golf, sorry, but he's playing golf. And then he said he's always get publicity of a place he can buy a stick or balls near the place he's going to golf. So he don't understand why, but he's logging and accept to give the data location everywhere he's going, but he's not trust city to manage the data of himself. So I said to him, so you're aware to give your personal data to a private company who sold your data to another one to give you that publicity, because he's always have his location and he knows because of your location and your data that you just pass near that store. So you're aware to give that data. You don't have confidence in city to manage your data. So we have a huge problem. That's the problem of the trust of users, the data for the municipality and the government. It's, for me, it's obvious that it's strange how come citizens are more confident in Facebook or other company to sold our home data to private for publicity, for money, but don't have a trust in city to manage the data to get you a better services. So for me, it's very strange, but that the fact that the trust, it's the central part of the managing the governance of data for a citizen or for a city, for a government.
This is actually such a great example when you compare, you know, of course, a private company, if you're not paying, you're the product. So they're for sure using your data. Adrienne, what is your take regarding data trust and how to build it in municipalities?
Sure. So I think that this is such a fascinating and complex topic, and one I wish I had a clear answer to. But I think that it's essential. And François talked a lot about you know, transparency and democracy, and like the link between those two things. And I think that one thing that I witnessed a lot of when I worked for New York City government is that in the absence of sharing information, people will come up with their own stories of what's happening. And that is part of the problem with how, you know, trust disintegrates. So one myth that existed about data in New York City government, which I found fascinating, was that some people had this idea that the New York City open data platform was publishing a different version of the data than what we had available internally. And what we had available internally was like the good stuff. And I thought this was incredible. Like, I would love to know where this good stuff is, where what you're seeing is what we're using too. And the big secret is that the New York City Open Data Platform is actually the most centralized data repository that the city of New York has. There isn't something better behind the scenes. And so it's really interesting. And I thought it was really helpful and important to uncover these myths and uncover these assumptions, actually. And I was only able to do that by talking to people, by, pre-pandemic, going out to events, hosting events, proactively going to different communities, doing a ton of Q&A to try to establish trust with people, primarily in the civic tech community, but then also eventually expanding to broader, maybe less tech and less data literate communities as well. And so I do think, it's hard to win over hearts and minds, one person and one event at a time, especially in a city with 9 million people. But it is a place to start, is to start to understand, like, what are these myths? What are the assumptions that people have about how their city operates? The other complexity around trust, I think, is that governments are complex institutions. I studied public policy. I worked in New York City government for 5.5 years. I still don't understand everything about how New York City government operates. And it was my full-time job to be a part of this organization. And so how are we expected to have, citizens and residents understand how this machine works well enough to be able to get involved, question things, advocate for things to be different, and really cultivate a sense of trust that, if the sanitation department is doing this, it's because it's definitely the best decision. And so to me, that's a bigger question of, what is the formula for cultivating trust with your constituents? And how can we try to debunk the myths and decomplexify our operations? I do believe transparency is a key tool in that formula, but otherwise still kind of working on the solution.
These are so interesting topics to discuss between, the fact that we share data with private companies who, we don't pay for the apps, but they leverage our data, they mine it. And the fact that still a lot of people are so suspicious of their own government that they think that they're hiding the good stuff somewhere else. We could go on for a long time. I know, Hubert, you said that it was a 25-minute conversation, so I just want to make sure that we're on time.
Yes, if you have still some questions, Naysan, and if François and Adrienne are okay, you can ask.
I have one more question before we finish. This is an important question for my own interest, but I think for everybody else as well. From my experience, there's so many silos, and you both touched on this point. Sometimes you can see the same data set is being used and updated by different departments, and they don't necessarily even use the same software to update the data set. So it's going to start diverging, and the question of who owns the data starts to become a problem, and which version is correct, and what do we do to update? And it's, to your point, Adrienne, it's super complex. And I think, François, Montreal, a city with, millions of people as well that are being served, with so many boroughs. First off, do you think this is a solvable problem within the next 5 years? And if so, how? How would you even tackle such a, monster?
I'm gonna say something that gonna cause a lot of reaction. When I was named at the head of the IT services, was what they say to me, that it's 80% of the apps and of all the city was past due. So you said about how to convert data and who's going to, when you have 80% passing due application in your system, you have a huge problem. Example, there's two applications who's working with the code COBOL. So, and there's only one person in the city who can make the thing with that application, and the thing is going to a retirement in 2 years. So we have a huge problem, and we have to hire him as a consultant after his retirement to be sure that we maintain the system. So it's a problem when you have a lot of application, and that's why what I said to the services is, if you want to get the right plan for the future, don't only put a strategy to just replace the older one, but think about what is the next services you want to put in technology. What is the next generation? So don't just replace the older one, but think about systemic strategy to be sure that you replace, or you're going in a new way as a technological transformation in the city, to be sure that what is the services needed for new technology, and is it possible that something new is going to happen or occur, and we're going to use instead of just replace the other one, because we're going to be in the same circle in 10 years because the application is going to be past due, and you have to invest so money in that. So, and you have to work with the innovation ecosystem. That's why we adapt a free software strategy to be sure that we're working with all the ecosystem, and just not the city who offer that system or software. Is it possible that the community work with the city to get that new innovation and have a lower cost for city and citizen? So we have to think differently. That's why I'm always talk about think outside of the box, think in spirit of innovation. And of course, innovation, it's not the core business of a city, because the politicians are afraid of experimentation. They are afraid of risk. They just don't want to take risk. But if you want to innovate, you have to take risk. You have to experiment. And so if you don't go in that way, we're just turning around and around and around and around. So we have to think differently.
Such an interesting perspective, Adrienne. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Sure. So I really like that, excuse me, that François had talked about talent, because I do think that organizations, they're made up of people, right? And so to me, it's coming back to, you know, how do you incentivize people to collaborate? And one thing that we did, so to your question about silos, at the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, we developed an initiative called the Analytics Exchange. So being a mayor's office, being kind of in the headquarters, if you will, of the government org chart, we were in a strategic position to convene people from across government. And when you think about the data maturity level of government and different city agencies, sometimes some teams only had the one data scientist and the spreadsheet person on their team, and they could feel really isolated. And that's a problem for a number of reasons. It's a problem from a talent retention perspective. It can be really hard to compete with the private sector even today to get really great data talent, folks who even understand data in the door, and to keep them for a significant period of time, such that the institutional knowledge training that you give them, which at least for New York City government took at least 6 to 8 months for people to like really understand how the city worked, so that isn't lost. You want this person to stick around for a while, right? And so to connect them to a community of peers across city government was one of our goals. And then the second goal was to say, well, rather than all reinventing the wheel, let's figure out what everybody else is doing. So we had an experiment. We said, okay, let's contact everyone we know working within New York City government on tech and data, and we'll try to get 30 people in the room and do a series of lightning talks. We ended up having 100 people in the room, people standing up in the back. And it was a really great demonstration of demand for connection with peers and for those who are data curious to learn more about what was happening in this part of New York City government, because not all of these people were empowered to talk about their work publicly. Not all of them understood what solutions, what resources were available. And so rather than even just sending an email with links, getting people physically together in a room, which hasn't been the easiest thing to do over the last few years, was something that was really powerful. And so that was one way that we broke down silos. And I was really excited to see that the team that I left actually hosted their first internal conference this past fall as a part of the analytics exchange as well, and it sounded like a few hundred people attending and engaging. And so it's really nice to see that engagement platform has grown. And then I think you brought up also a really great point around data ownership. And to me, that's a key component of data governance. And I think is just something that will hopefully become more normal over time as different organizations kind of progress along the data maturity spectrum. I think early on, from a data maturity perspective, a team and organization might just have a spreadsheet and like the intern is updating it and like it lives over here in the shared drive. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's a clear data owner. There's a process for involving stakeholders, maybe internally and externally, that are represented in the data set. You're getting advice on, the data privacy concerns around that data set. You understand which components can be made public or not. And so I think that government is still a bit behind the private sector when it comes to, understanding the value of data infrastructure. And until the value of data infrastructure is truly understood by leadership, and until leadership understands what it takes to get that stat, that number, that metric on your desk, is that you have all these data engineers, you have a data governance process, you have a data product, you have to host it in the cloud. Until leadership understands what it takes to get that end product on their desk, there won't be the level of investment and management and governance required to answer that data ownership question. But I'm optimistic that we're getting there.
This is really inspiring. So the way I see it, François, it's planning for the future instead of planning reactively. Let's replace this thing because it's past due. And Adrienne, I think part of what you said was really talking to people, making connections now so the people can stay, so the people know what they're doing together. And then eventually we can plan this future together. But from what I understand, in both cases, it's probably more of a 10-year project than a 2-year project. Yeah, I mean, to conclude, it's just an open question that Hubert has prepared. Could you both share what you've identified as the most important good practice in the field of urban data for you?
Go ahead, Adrienne.
Oh, I'm just going to sound like a broken record, but I'll go back to saying it's not actually about the technology, but it's about the people, whether it's the people on the team generating the data, the people represented in the data. And so thinking about how can you make sure that diversity is top of mind as you find and build your teams, so that you make sure you have representative perspectives as the technology, the tool, the data is being implemented and rolled out. Challenge your assumptions as you think about tech and data implementations, and establish values. I think that we have this assumption that government teams, because it's a public institution, like there are values, there are democratic values, But the reality is that people bring their own experiences and biases to the table. And it's really important to make sure that a team is very clear on what our values are, that the objectives and values of a data program, a data tool, a data resource are clear as well. And I think it's worth baking that exercise into the design and the project plan of these resources as well.
Yeah, I'm agreed. Just the strengthness of an organization is how far you can innovate. And you have to use more knowledge to transform in innovation. And for that, you have to get to put a context of agility, flexibility, and then you can have the great culture of innovation in the organization. So you have to use the talent you have in your organization, but also outside of the organization. You have to work together. You have to be more flexible when you have some bylaw or law who can just stop you in innovation. You have to think differently, like I said before. And so sometimes for politicians, for cities, it's quite difficult to innovate because of the law, because of the processes, intern processes, the way of things. But if you want to innovate, you have to change the culture of organization to be sure that you always set to create something new. Transform the knowledge in innovation need creation. And you can't create if you're stuck in the old way, if you're stuck in a mindset that said that you cannot do that because of the law. No, change the law. So, for me, it's really important. I'm working now in private sector and it's the same way. It's the same things. And so if you want to do differently, we have to do things differently. So instead of get the same result, we always think that we're gonna get a new kind of result by doing the same thing, by just optimize processes. But optimized processes, it's not innovation. It's not doing differently. So if you want to get a different result, we have to do differently. So we have more than a huge goals before us, in front of us. It's the climate crisis. And it's bigger than the COVID-19 crisis we just occur right now. It's going to be huge. And so if you want to change the thing, we have to change the way we're thinking and the way that we're doing things. We have to think in the context of system, and we have to change the system. So it's a huge work we have to do.
I think thank you so much to the two of you for sharing your expertise with us. I personally learned a lot from this hour of talk. I hope it was the same for the rest of us. And just to finish, I think Adrienne's comment is the best way to conclude. So she wrote, learn the rules so that you can then break them. And I think that's pretty much the story with, such a topic like data governance. You do have to learn the rules first and then break them. Thank you so much.
Maybe one last thing, Naysan, because I saw that Nigel Jacob is connected, and I think it's really great to have him with us today. Maybe to quickly present Nigel for those who don't know him, he is a co-founder of the New Urban Mechanics, and really what he did is truly inspiring on this topic of data governance, civic innovation. And again, I know that you know him very well. So Nigel, maybe would you agree to react on what have been said quickly?
Okay. Good to see you. Good to see you all, Adrienne. Good. I think we've met a couple times. I loved everything that was said. I certainly agree. I did like this focus on sort of focus on the needs of people and understanding, you know, even though, again, so my experience is very much based in Boston, but my experience is, you know, these are rules made by humans, you know, and oftentimes they're not actually rules, they're just rules of thumb, or they're existing patterns of behavior. So they're not actually, in my case, what we found when we asked, like when we were doing things about writing RFPs, we would say, does it have to have all 5 of these signatures? But that seems ridiculous. Can we just have one? And everyone assumed that yes, you have to have all 5. And then we checked with the lawyers and they said, nope, you need 1. And so I think there's, in addition to understanding the rules, I think it's also worth noting, again, like New York might be a special case, and maybe Montreal is too, but you know, in my city is half the size. Less than half the size of New York. And so in my case, so many of the rules were just in people's heads, and they were entirely cultural. And so that made them harder to find because they're not written down anywhere, but also easier to break. And so I would encourage people to do some culture hacking as you try to understand the art of the possible in your institution.
Wow, this is such an incredible way to. Well, I'm gonna have to digest this. So thank you for this perspective.
Sure, my pleasure. Good to see you.
Same.
Well, thanks everyone. Thanks a lot for this very, very inspiring discussion, insightful conversation. This is already the end of this Urban AI conversation. The recording will be very soon available on YouTube, and our next Urban AI conversation is next week, and it will be on a very different topic. We will talk about mobility as a service with 2 of the greatest actually experts on this topic, Aurélien Côté and Scott Shepard. So have a great day, and see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.